Welcome everyone. So event will start at 11 a.m. CST time. Please stand by.
All right, let's get started.
So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar here at the SIT. And yes, we're going to be talking about information leaks on social media,
right? So why would you actually kind of want to know about all the things that are happening, and are there any consequences for your business? And we're going to talk about this in the next 45 minutes. If you have any questions, then feel free to post them in the Q&A section of the Zoom, and we will be happy to discuss those. And of course, the whole webinar is recorded, so afterwards we can send you the recording and you can go back and listen to it or share it with your friends. But let's jump right into it. And well, my name is Kenneth West. I will be one part of the moderating discussion team here. I'm a faculty member of the SIT, so teaching a cybersecurity class online. Well, at the moment, I guess most of it is online, but I'm also the Vice President of Cyber Protection Research at Acronis and have been dealing with cyber threats for more than the last 20 years. So unfortunately, I have seen my fair share of threats coming towards small companies, larger companies. And of course, yes, we want to make sure that you are aware of those threats and how to combat those and kind of why you should actually face those. With me, I have Bojan, but I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks a lot, Candid. My name is Bojan Nastovic. I'm one of the founders of Raccoon. What we do at Raccoon is mainly support clients and companies to leverage emerging technologies and make their business more resilient and ready for the future. So thanks a lot for having me today.
It's my pleasure. So let's hope that everyone can hear us fine. And let's start with the discussion, right? So it's all about those social media leaks that we have actually heard in the past quite a few times. And I mean, what are the consequences, right? That's the big question here. And I'll stop my sharing screen here and go back to just the two of us. So I guess in the last month, there have been quite a few of those incidents, right? Facebook had a data leak of 533 million user records, specifically the mobile phone number and kind of your username, email address. Then there was LinkedIn with another 500 million data being leaked. And even Clubhouse, the audio chat platform, had some information leaked. And of course, you could argue, for example, with Clubhouse, it wasn't really a hack. So the company wasn't hacked. It was just publicly available information which was scraped. So someone created a script to automatically go through all the potential information, and then they managed to get 1.3 million user records, right? And those are just the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, we have seen so many things happening, not just this year, but in the years before. And I guess the question is, do people actually care about privacy?
I believe, yes, they care in theory, but in practice, it's the biggest issue is convenience. Let's see, for example, all the cookie banners that we need to accept just to surf on the website since we introduced GDPR. It was meant to improve the privacy and to, ensure that the awareness is there for people. But it's annoying. So what's happening, you just click away and basically accept always giving away most of your data, I believe even more than before. And I see it with myself because I got the topic I installed even a plugin that kills the pop-ups automatically just because I don't want to always read through all that. So I believe the awareness in theory is there, but annoying.
Yeah, I guess that is. And I mean, we have been seeing, right, that people, if they get annoyed by all those pop-ups, they probably will just click through it. And in the end, I mean, you always have the option of not using Facebook, not using LinkedIn, but maybe all your friends are using it, right? So it is difficult to stay away from it. And it's kind of a balance, right? Do you want to actually participate with it? Being aware that there are some risks that your information might be leaked to somewhere else, or do you just stay out of it? And yeah, with LinkedIn, I mean, I'm using it for business reasons as well, so it actually might be sometimes important, right? So that balance is not easy, I imagine.
No, I believe that's the biggest issue what we see. On the one hand, with the pandemic and everything, being active on social, being active digitally, trying to sell is extremely important. So you need to share your stuff. On the other hand, you want to take some cautions and precautions on the privacy side. So it's, as you mentioned, a huge balancing act with what we see with And still, I believe people should be paying more attention to privacy and security, and finding the right priorities, I would say. Because it's not just about black and white and saying, oh, let's just share everything or nothing. I believe the big question is, how much do you share so that it still brings you a value for your personal and business life, and but you're not sharing stuff that you shouldn't.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
and I know your
sorry
privacy
for
is there,
interrupting.
but I hear that
Can you
should
please,
put the
Brian,
microphone
just have the
close.
microphone closer?
Yes.
Thank you.
So sounds like you're kind of hesitant to share your voice here as well, which, yes, it's exactly that balance, right? So yeah, we'll try to keep the microphone a bit closer, but I fully agree, right? It's for some of the things, I mean, using, let's say, Facebook or any of the other social media, Instagram, TikTok, I mean, you probably should decide on your own, what are you really sharing, right? Is it a picture that you would share with your grandma as well? Or is it something that you would be embarrassed if not just your private kind of closed circle actually sees it? So we probably should kind of pay attention to double check, what are we sharing? And yes, of course, we always hear that kind of, I have nothing to hide, right? I mean, I don't care if everyone sees that. Yes, that might be true, but unfortunately, we have seen that this information can actually be misused by attackers. So for example, after the Facebook leak with all those mobile phone numbers, we have seen a drastic increase of spam text messages being sent around. So you will receive a text message saying, hey, there's a parcel delivery from FedEx, DHL, or any of those companies. Just click on that link here to confirm that you're at home. Well, I guess during the pandemic, most of the people will probably be at home, but still, right? I mean, we're so used to that. You receive it, it looks like it's legitimate, so you might fall and then give in some private information on top of it. So they can use the information, even if it's publicly available, to personalize their attacks. And here the point is, because it's in one of those databases with more than 500 million data records, it's easy for them to automate it. They can just have a script going over it and kind of go by one, right? Making it a lot more scalable, and of course, they can increase the frequency. So I think those targeted attacks are definitely something which is dangerous. And I mean, you deal with a lot of small and medium organizations, right? How confident would you be that they will see kind of those messages and know, oh, this is not the real one?
To be honest, I believe most of them will not recognize, especially the ones which are done a little bit better. Because, you know, in the past, we have seen a lot of messages where it was pretty obvious, first of all, you know, writing to a German-based company, a Swiss-based company only in English, which is unusual, you know what I mean? You will react on that. But it's getting more sophisticated. And as soon as, especially under the pressure what people have during their daily jobs now, it's becoming easier to attack, to be honest, and people are not that aware anymore. So it's, I believe the percentage of people who would click on it is much higher now than in the past.
So that sounds at least good, that people are getting more and more aware of it, right? Which is definitely the right angle. And we will dive into a bit more on kind of what the real consequences is if you click on it, say in the second part. But probably another thing to mention is that there have been a lot of data breaches happening because of the changes that happened in the last 18 months, right? Many companies have moved to new business models, to remote workforce. So people are working at home. Many of them have switched to the cloud. Maybe your organization didn't have an e-commerce online shop, but suddenly you had to close down your brick and mortar shop. So you had to create one of those online shops. And the cloud is a very good way to do this, right? Because you can be quick in adapting, dynamically improving. Usually there's kind of point and click solutions. So in 5 minutes, you have your e-commerce shop, at least if I trust the advertisements. But the question is it a secure one, right? And unfortunately, we have seen that very often. Yes, it is running, it's up there, but it might not be secure. So maybe the question again, for your perspective on the business side, is it because they just don't have the time, or why are so many specific small companies struggling with configuring the cloud access secure?
So what we see is basically three stereotypes. One is the group that simply says, you know what, I don't have any data that can be stolen, which is of any relevance for somebody, so I don't need to care, which is for sure a wrong assumption, because still it's not just about losing your data to somebody else. It's especially if somebody basically kills your access to your data, and if your data wouldn't be available for 5-10 days, would your business still run? That's the right question to be asked. The second group, what we see is they're simply not aware of potential security issues, or are overwhelmed with security topics and saying, you know what, I don't know what is exactly, so I will not take care too much about that, and probably is not relevant for me. And then you have the third group, which I believe is the majority currently, is they are stressed out to keep the lights on of the business, to ensure to transition from the classical models to new digital models. So they simply don't have the time and the priority to think about security. While they are aware they should, it's more about, I have 100 other tasks that I need to do to keep my business running. And yes, there is security that I should care, so I will just reprioritize it when I have time. And I believe that's one of the bigger mistakes, because we need to have a good balance between keeping the lights on and having the operations up and running, but also at least do some basic security prevention just to ensure that nothing goes down.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point there. As you mentioned, a lot of the companies, they might be aware of it, but yes, the lockdown sometimes happens quite quickly, right? So from one week to another, so they had to keep the lights on, as you say. And I fully understand this as well. It is, of course, challenging, specifically if you don't have enough resources, you have to prioritize. And very often, yes, they take the risk, willingly or unwillingly, or let's say knowingly or unknowingly. But yes, it is understandable that some companies, of course, do the priority on keeping the business up and running. The question is, do they actually come back, right? I mean, we have been in lockdown for quite a while in many countries. So by now, hopefully, you would have had the time to actually go over those and recheck the policies. Do you actually have policies for working at home, for your new cloud services? Do you actually get the information, like the log files, the access control logs from those new services into your security information enumeration systems and so on? So do you actually make use of that? Because I've seen many companies, unfortunately, which have, for example, a Amazon AWS S3 data bucket, which is one of those, let's say, file share types where you upload all your data, making accessible by the web server or by some database. And unfortunately, they're configured so that everyone can read it. And this has happened many, many times before. Just yesterday, there was a case with an energy provider who actually had the whole customer database exactly configured that everyone can read it. And well, it's already bad if those data leaks happen, but the question is, if you're not monitoring it, if you're not ingesting those log files, you might not even know about it. And I think it's very bad if you will figure it out due to a customer telling you, or probably even the newspaper telling you. That's definitely not what you want to have. So yes, definitely make sure that whenever you have any new services, security should be part, at least in the thought of, from the beginning. And I agree, sometimes you might decide, okay, I'm doing it later, not now, but at least you have thought about it. I think that's the important part.
I think to add one point to that is also that in the last 5-10 years, when we started with the whole cloud topic, and to try to convince people to move to the cloud, we used often the argument that go to the cloud, it's much more secure than if you do something at your own on-premise. So this was something that we raised as a perception to people. Cloud is more secure than what you have on-premise as a principle. And now when you get under pressure to just basically move on and bring your business into a digital world, you still have that in your back of your mind and saying, you know what, cloud is more secure than what I had before, so I don't have to care that much. While we all know that it's about, security, you need to still provide also cloud. Yes, it's more secure on one angle, you know what I mean, in terms of updates, etc., which are being done by the cloud providers, but still, security is something that you need to take care of.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's your data. So you're the owner of the data, regardless of if you have them at Microsoft, Azure, Google, Amazon, or any other third-party cloud. Well, they might make sure that the infrastructure is there, that it's not burning down, although even those disasters can unfortunately happen. And you should have a disaster recovery plan for this as well. But yes, I mean, there have been the cases where Microsoft Office 365 Teams chat has been deleted by a consultant, and 145,000 chat messages have, or kind of user records have been deleted. And since there was no backup, well, it's gone, right? It's a human error. So it's not that the system was vulnerable. It was just one of those human error, not even an insider malicious attack, but just, well, yeah, things that happen. But because they had no backup, the data is gone, right? Which exactly is the point. You are the owner of it, so you need to make sure that your cloud services can actually follow your policies that you have, and maybe also your regulations. Because you mentioned GDPR, privacy regulations here in Europe, but of course there are the privacy acts in California and various others coming up as well, Singapore, for example. So you have to make sure that the data is actually secure, and if it does leak, well, you have to inform the authorities, sometimes in 48 hours or 72 hours. You have to inform the customers, and that's another process that you should already think about now, because otherwise, once you're under fire, running around, hopefully not headless, it's too late, right? You have to have those checklists for all those incidents and events, I guess.
No, I fully agree. And I believe one of the other things that you need always to, this self-assessment that you can do is just think about what would happen if you lose access to your data for 5, 10, 15 days. You have simply no access to your customer database anymore, to the emails, what you have with your customers, no access to your orders currently. How long would it last until you need to shut down the business? And that's what's happening. It's not about just losing data to somebody else and this can be misused. It's really about your data, and if you don't have access to your data anymore, how long can you survive?
Yeah, exactly. Will you survive? That's the big question, right? Because I mean, 10 days, well, even 7 days is a lot of time. So I have my doubts that many companies actually will not have huge impact if they will be down and even lose the whole data. So we have been talking now kind of all the bad things that can happen to your data, right? Which we hope doesn't happen. But as we've seen with Facebook, LinkedIn, and so many in the past, yes, at one point your information might leak, and it might not even be in your own facility. It might be at some other organization. There has been a sharing application from Exilion, for example, which has been hacked. And due to that, a lot of companies like Singtel, the telecommunication provider, lost some user data which was stored on that third-party platform. So the question is, well, if we talk about social media, why should people care, right? I mean, we already mentioned the personalized phishing email, which is definitely something which is really, really bad, right? But what happens afterwards with that data? Do you have any examples of, let's say, non-named client of something that happened?
Well, the thing that we see, one example was really where emails, it was a company with multiple, let's say, locations. So with more than 60 people were not knowing each other 100%. So if I know that in location A, a person is on vacation because I see that on social media like Facebook, and I know also that she has birthday, for example, tomorrow, that can be misused to send basically phishing attack and say, hey, do you want to provide some money for the present we want to do for the birthday of Sarah tomorrow? By the way, click on the Excel list and just add your data into it so we can cover it. And the chance that somebody will click on it is huge. And this is a real example that we have seen. And this was opening up the doors for the attacker basically to get on the data.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of goes into the direction of the classical CEO fraud or business email compromise, right? Where someone pretends to be your chief financial officer or even just some high-level management person, and then they will send a mail saying, hey, we need to do some donation, please transfer the money now. Or I'm in a meeting now, I need a few voucher cards for iTunes, Amazon, or something. Please go and buy some. You can expense it, don't worry, I'll approve it. But just take a picture and send it to this address, because my laptop has no longer a battery, so don't mail it to me, send it through text message. And I mean, it sounds so silly, but unfortunately it happens quite a lot. And the more information about yourself and exactly if if the other one is already in vacation or attending a conference. This helps to kind of get the context. I think that's the bad thing. And the other thing is, of course, yes, sometimes if you click on it, it might be one of those ransomware cases, right? Well,
and I believe this is exactly the biggest issue. What you can run into is not just to lose the data basically to somebody else, is really losing access to your own data and basically be forced to pay to just get potentially your data back. And that's the biggest risk I still would see from a purely business perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, most ransomware cases at the moment, is specifically the targeted ones by the large groups like Doppelpaymer, Conti, Klopp. They not just focus on disrupting you by encrypting your data, they will also steal your information. For example, at the moment, one of the suppliers of Apple has been compromised by Revile ransomware group, and they have stolen some of the blueprints of Apple. And we all know they are usually quite good guarded. They're now asking 50 million, 50 US dollars in ransom to get the information back. And if it's not paid by the end of the week, it actually doubles to 100. I mean, I doubt that they will pay it, but for a smaller company, even a smaller ransom might be devastating, right? So if you don't have the backups, but also a disaster recovery plan, because backup alone will not be good enough, right? Yes, you can restore it, but if your information has already been stolen, you still need to inform all your customers. You still need to change the passwords and kind of go maybe for GDPR and so on. So there's still a lot of things to happen. So better is being prepared that it's not happening to begin with, right? And I guess password's another one. I know we have been talking passionately about password reuse, right? So what would you say, what happens if at Facebook or LinkedIn, and it has happened in the past, someone is able to get your password with the data breach as well?
To be honest, the chance that this email is being used also in a business environment is pretty high. And what we have seen, we have forced people from a company perspective, policy perspective, to change their password pretty often, which leads to, again, convenience level is, say, you know what, I will just use one's password, that I just change some small things and then it will work, you know what I mean? And if that gets leaked on the social, the chance that that's really also one that's reused in business is high. And if that's the case, it's opening up the doors for the attacker on the business side.
Yeah, I mean, the password reuse is still amazingly easy for the attackers. So just imagine if there is even just 100,000 accounts somewhere in the dark web available, they will download it, they will use the email address, the password, and then try it with all the potential services. So they will try to log into your PayPal account, your online shopping account, credit card, and of course also your VPN, your remote desktop protocol at work, all of those services, and they might get lucky. Specifically now where we have Office 365, quite popular, once you're in, you have access to the OneDrive file share. You can send emails in the name of whoever account you compromised. So just having that one password opens up the whole door to the company. So yeah, I mean, definitely not just use strong passwords, but use unique passwords. Don't use the same passwords on other services, specifically the social media accounts, because if they are leaked, well, they will be reused before you actually have the chance to change it, because the attackers, they're usually quite fast in finding out, oh, there has been a new data leak, let's use it up. So that's definitely one thing. I think multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, like where you receive a text message, or even better, you have an application on your phone generating a new token every 60 seconds. That's definitely increasing the security as well. It's not foolproof. Those have been hacked as well, but it definitely makes it a lot harder because now you need a second thing to actually log in. And of course, yes, there is the joke about I had to rename or kind of give a new name to my cat the second time now, because yes, the password keeps leaking, right? So don't use your cat name or dog name as a password, because eventually you will rename your cat, which is definitely not good. But what's your opinion on password managers? Good, bad? Do you use one?
I definitely use one, and with all clients that we talk, is one of the first recommendation that I would do is to use password managers and also really ensure that you have unique passwords across all your accounts. Funny enough, and that's one example that we talked with one client and told me, yeah, that's not a risk for him. He's not reusing his password that often. And we tried an example and say, okay, do you mind to give me and share with me the password of LinkedIn? Just write it down for yourself. And then tell me what's your password to log in into your Windows machine, and then asking, can you please compare the ones? Is it the same? Yes. So can we check if your data was leaked? That's the second check we'd have done. And yes, it was leaked. So it was shocking for him. And then the first question is, okay, but I need to remember all the passwords which I'm changing now. And that's where you basically plug in the password managers and trying to suggest really that's the best way you can go.
Absolutely. And I'm a fan of, well, I'm using a password manager, which I can synchronize with my mobile phone, because maybe I'm on the road somewhere and I need that specific password. And yes, I'm getting older. I cannot remember 200 different passwords because they are strong with multi characters and special characters and so on. So it's definitely good. There is also a second good point with password managers, because if you have one which is integrated in a browser or even just an application, they will detect the website you're on. And if you're not on the real website, if you're on a phishing website that just pretends to be Microsoft, Amazon, or any of those goods, then they will say, hey, I don't have a password for that site because it is a different one. And at least at that point, you should realize, oh, maybe that is not Netflix or Spotify, and therefore not give in your password. So yes, of course, you're relying just on one master password. And if you lose that password together with your database of all the passwords, then it's kind of game over as well. But the benefits definitely outweigh the risks here. And again, you don't need to put it somewhere on a cloud server. You can have it just on your mobile phone or just on your laptop, reducing the risk of yet another data leak, mentioning then in the next webcast we do. So I think Password Manager is definitely something to do with the strong, unique passwords and the multi-factor authentication. But maybe, yes, coming back to the working from home, right? There's another aspect. We mentioned the cloud as being one, but of course, we also seen that the habits of the user have changed a bit. So now you might do a backup, hopefully, at home, right? And depending on your bandwidth, maybe you don't do it to the cloud because you think, oh, it's taking too long. I don't want to keep my machine running. So let's do another backup locally on your USB disk, which is good. But the question is, does the company actually know about it? Is it the same USB disk which is not encrypted and also used for your location pictures? And what happens with it if the employee decides to leave the company? Can you actually enforce it? Do you have track of it, right? On one hand, we always say there's kind of a rule of thumb of 3-2-1 with backups, which means, well, you should have at least 3 instances of your copy of your data, meaning one that you work on, and then 2 copies, 2 backups. But one of those you should also have on a different location. Because in the end, well, we all know things might get stolen. Knock on wood, but it can happen that your home burns down or gets flooded, right? And if you have the backups just on the same machine, well, if there is a natural catastrophe, then it will be affected as well. So it should be on a separate location, but you should also have a good plan to actually get the data back if you need it. That's the disaster recovery. But back to the topic of our webcast, right? Kind of data leaks. So unfortunately, we have also seen that many of the users at home are using, let's say, Dropbox or any similar systems, which might not be sanctioned by the IT department. And then they share information, large files, because they cannot share it by email because it's too big. Now the question is, are those links protected, right? Maybe someone else has access to it. Maybe you forgot that your friends have the same folder for sharing the pictures from the vacation. So that's another way where we see data leaks happening. And of course, this can be sensitive information as well. So you need to make sure that in all aspects of your data, you know where it is and who has access to it, regardless of if it's social media, your private one, or if it's an organizational kind of state of backups and disaster recovery. But yeah, let's kind of go back to the small and medium businesses. We mentioned it is a tough one, it's a struggle. Any kind of tips, what should they do, right? Kind of, if I would have to ask you, give me 3 tips that they should address now. Any answers?
Well, I believe I would start with the password manager, that introducing that as a company-wide topic would be number 1 that I would highly recommend. And it's an easy one to be implemented. It's not, first of all, not too costly, and provides also convenience level to the people. So I believe it's a win-win in the end. the second one is provide really sharing capabilities which are approved by the company and also monitored and governed by the company. And I believe this was one of the biggest struggles for small ones, that now people are just working from remote, where they were not ready basically to use any data exchange capabilities. And they even lowered sometimes their security policies quickly just to enable the business to work. I believe now it's important to get back again to standards for the company and saying, this is the standard service you should use to exchange and keep the data on, and this needs to be monitored and secured by the company. And the third one is probably also awareness. One of the things that what I also see with small companies, the big ones are able to supply laptops, etc., over time, so that you're using a business machine for the work. But in small companies, you see a lot of private machines being used for the work, and just having the awareness: are maybe your kids even using the same machine? Are the kids even aware how they're using it? So some stuff like that need to be ensured, and also the awareness needs to be increased around that.
Yeah, I think those are good tips that definitely should be followed. And just as a reminder, if you have any question, feel free to post them into the Q&A tab of your Zoom chat. So we're happy to kind of slide over to the Q&A. But yeah, I think on kind of tips, what should be done, one of the questions I always get is, well, but my connection was protected, right? I got the small padlock saying everything is encrypted. I used HTTPS, so how happened that the information got actually leaked? And of course, here it is, the SSL or TLS connection, which is exactly this padlock, is just encrypting the information from your machine to whatever end service you have. But it does not necessarily verify that it is the correct one. At least that's up to you to identify correctly. And we have seen that many phishing websites, they use those HTTPS encryptions as well to kind of add legitimacy to the whole kind of space. So yes, your information might be encrypted from your machine to the phishing website, but that's not really helping you. Or even if it is to the social media network, which at the moment all of the large ones actually do, as we've seen, you don't really know what's happening on the other end, right? If the information is maybe in an unencrypted database, which is accessible by everyone. So unfortunately, you cannot really, well, you can ask, but usually you cannot verify how is LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and so on dealing with those information in the backend. You just have to believe it. But if something happens, then you need to be prepared that if that password has been used by any of your users, you should automatically change it, right? Or at least lock the account and have the users change the password through a means of their business email or something else which you think is not compromised. And I deliberately say think because, of course, it is not always easy to determine if your email has already been compromised as well. Because the attackers, yes, they are happily kind of taking over those accounts. Sometimes they just want to, well, post some pictures, get some more likes and followers for others. So that's probably the ones that you can be lucky that it doesn't really add too much. But if you're unlucky, yes, then it's those ransomware attacks, which might, as we've seen, ask you for $50 million in ransom. And that's definitely not something you want to be on the receiving end. So always make sure that those things are protected, of course. And yes, patching is another thing I would probably mention, because we have seen, I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, right, that people kind of know, okay, cloud, yes, it's secure because someone else deals with it. Well, sometimes you hear the difference as well, saying, oh, no, I can handle my data perfectly well. I don't trust anyone else. I know I'm on top of it. Well, unfortunately, as we have seen with the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, which has been exploited in the last 2 months actively, well, not everyone is really good in keeping up with the patches. Again, it might be a business decision, right? They don't have the time. They want to test it first. But that exactly leads to those where, well, your local infrastructure is not yet patched, whereas the cloud is probably already updated and at least has some mitigation if there is no patch available. So you're unfortunately more vulnerable unless you get the IT guys to come in on the weekend, spend the extra 24 hours night shifts to actually fix it. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So there's always pros and cons on both sides. In the end, the important thing is to know what's actually happening, and as we said, who has access to your data, right?
I believe one of the things that we see, especially in the financial services industry, is not that they are not aware that they need to patch. It's also not that they are not willing to patch, but sometimes they are not able to patch. What I mean with that is we have built up so much legacy systems over time that by upgrading even to a newest browser version would basically destroy your application. You will not be able to work with it. So what they're doing is trying to extend the lifetime of the legacy system as long as possible, which again harms their capability to upgrade their systems as they should do.
Yeah, it's a good point. As you say, it's the balance, right? Sometimes, specifically financial applications, as you say, sometimes they're still running on Windows XP or even DOS, right? In the manufacturing environments, we see those as well. And yes, you can say, hey, you should patch it. Well, there is unfortunately no patch available for the Windows XP environment, let's assume. But changing the whole ecosystem there, changing the machine, that's going to cost you a few millions as well. So it's not something you can just say, oh yeah, let's replace all those kind of machines that we have in place. So it's not always easy, but you need to have a layered defense for those. So making sure that, well, at least you can contain it, that it's not spreading to others, and that you're not simply able to, let's say, attack your whole organization through some fish tank thermostat. And this is exactly what happened in Vegas at a casino. They got hacked through a thermostat from one of those huge fish tanks. And from that, the attackers actually managed to get into the hotel network, down to the high roller table, and get some information as well. So as everything is connected, and as you said, very complex infrastructure, it can lead to some things which you might not have thought about.
To add one point, just as a reflection to that, is also when we show examples, mainly we are using examples which are overseas, which are not a European classical example. It's not coming from a small and medium-sized enterprise world, and especially also in Europe, we tend not to talk about if something happens, which again is not giving us enough opportunity to talk about the cases which are happening, which leads to the perception, well, that's happening somewhere there and in Asia, but not in Europe, not in Switzerland, certainly not in Germany, not in Austria, which is completely wrong. And I believe that's one of the issues what we have from our own security industry, is to also talk about the examples which are really happening here, so that people get really aware. It's also here around the corner in 2000 on Zurich or Bern or in Berlin. It's possible that it can happen, not just in Vegas. I believe that's one of the topics that I see with small and medium-sized companies.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. We probably don't hear enough of those cases in the media, because let's face it, if a hairdresser got attacked through ransomware and they have to close down their business, it's probably not as sexy as a news as if a supplier of Apple got ransomed for 50 million, right? I agree. Unfortunately, that's kind of requests and demands, right? That's how the news work. But for your environment, for your local business, well, as we say, it can be devastating. And we have seen many, many small and medium-sized companies, unfortunately, having to declare bankruptcy because they were no longer able to actually fulfill their normal jobs. They have lost too much data that they cannot recover. And specifically now during lockdown and pandemic times, it is difficult already. So as you said, can you survive 7 days without your data? And I remember there was a case a few years back in Switzerland where a hairdresser actually got compromised by ransomware. They encrypted the whole database with all their customers, with all the client appointments as well. So they wouldn't really know how many appointments do we have the next few days. Have we already sent an invoice for those or not? So that can be quite bad. There has been a case in Austria where a hotel got compromised. And you remember all those nice credit card keys? Well, unfortunately, the system for the door locks has been encrypted as well, meaning none of the doors opened anymore. So they had to kind of call in and get one of those passepartout keys and then kind of open up the doors for the visitors. That's definitely not good. And they decided to go back to physical metal keys because they no longer trust that system. Luckily, they're not out of business, but it can show that there are some real consequences if it happens. And yes, if we go back, it's all happening with one leak, one shared password, right? So I guess you have to be aware that yes, sharing is good. We're not saying social media is bad, right? But pay attention that this information might leak out of your closed circle that you think you're sharing with, and this information may be used against you just for personalized images. I mean, we haven't even touched on deepfakes, right? Which would be, I guess, another topic. We had a nice discussion on that earlier on as well, right?
No, definitely, and this is the next thing which we will see more and more, where you get a video from somebody that you know, which is faked, and giving you some instructions, orders, asking you for sharing maybe some other details. And just imagine this is the guy from your IT department asking you to give him quickly the password because he's on the way, he needs it to fix something. How many would make the mistake and give it away? Because the topic is not yet that much in the media, not in the general media, so the awareness is still not that high on that.
Yes, so unfortunately, that's something that takes time, but awareness is definitely something that we have to work on. And I guess that's the point where I'll go back to sharing my slides here, because we are also kind of coming up with the end of our webcast. So, of course, we're at SIT. That's kind of our mission, right? We want to share knowledge. We want to enable people to be aware of those things, identify them, and of course, also prevent any impacts and damaging from happening. So I highly recommend that you check out our cybersecurity course. There's a free preview where you can go through a few models to see what are the basics about cybersecurity and what you as a management or organization person have to know about those cyber risks out there. Of course, as I mentioned, we also shared the recording of this webcast and previous and future webcasts on the sit.org website. So I highly recommend going there as well. And if there should be any follow-up question, feel free to reach us at events@sit.org. But yeah, we definitely hope to see you again. But before I close it off here, I definitely want to see, any last recommendations that you think you have to do if you now close off the webcast and say, okay, now I'm hungry, what else should I do, right? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, so one of the things that many people would go out of such a meeting, depending on their role and what they do, and think about, okay, this is something my IT partner needs to deal with, or this is the tech guy who needs to take care about that. I strongly advise to make that a management topic, because on the management, this is basically one of your key things that you need to manage from a risk perspective, and it can't be just delegated to somebody else. So I'm highly recommending really the management teams and founders, the owners of the business, to take care about that themselves, get informed, get the right awareness to be able to set the right measures for the future, because you need to demystify the topic to a certain extent to be able to take measures. And it's also not any more overwhelming, just a huge cybersecurity topic. No, there are 10 topics that you can do. And as you mentioned, start deploying password managers, ensure that you have the right backup of the method of 3-2-1. Such topics can be done immediately. So go out, put the list together, what measures you wanted to, where is the biggest risk you have, and try to close the biggest ones. Not everything, but the biggest ones.
Yeah, exactly. Start somewhere, right? And then start improving. It's like going to the gym, and yes, I should probably now as well, but you have to get started, right? Don't expect to run a marathon in 1 week, but take the steps to actually go there. Follow those best practices and kind of move into that direction. And yes, exactly. You should use cloud. You should still use social media. It's a nice way, specifically now, to engage with the people, keep up with the friends. We all are kind of, lurking for those nice, good messages and kind of nice stories, right? So make use of that personal touch through social media, but make sure that you have strong and unique passwords, that if something happens, it's not going to be your account which leads to your financial disaster, to your company getting compromised, because your boss, your corporation will probably not be happy if they have to figure out, oh, it was actually your Twitter account that led to the whole company needing to fire 10 people. So make sure that it's only good news and not bad news. And on that note, I would say thank you very much for attending. We hope this short webcast from the SIT was interesting for you, please join in for future webcasts where we discuss different other topics around IT, around physics, and other science topics which we think are important nowadays, because information is key. And of course, sharing the information, like with the awareness, can help you to have a more safe and also more interesting life in the digital web space. And with that, thank you and stay cyberfit.
Take care.